Hey, deserving listeners, today's episode is the most difficult episode that I've ever made or put out there into the world. And I thought a long time about whether or not to even put it out there, but I concluded that I would in the end for a variety of reasons. So in this episode, Humberto and I get into a big fight, and we're fighting about a previous fight. And in some ways, you could say we're fighting about all the fights we've been in. I'm going to spoil the ending by saying it resolves. We resolve it. We come together. We cry together. We hug it out. And we're closer than ever now because of the fight and because of us working at trying to work it out, us trying to understand each other, us trying to apologize, right? Trying to take responsibility. And that's new. We've apologized to each other before, but not in this way. And I've never heard or seen the kind of things that I heard and saw from Humberto as I did at the end of this fight. And the reason why I'm spoiling the ending is because it goes on for a while. The fighting goes on for a while. And for a lot of you who have been with us for many, many years, it might be traumatic, literally, to watch people that you care about fight with each other and hurt each other and be mean to each other. And some of you might have traumas around that, right? If you grew up in a conflictual household. So one, monitor that for yourself, but also know that it resolves. It's not going to take away the tension in the moment because I'm guessing, even though I know that it resolves, when I was reviewing this, it's really hard. And by the way, if you're listening to this on an audio version, there's a video version on YouTube, which adds a whole layer of body language and facial expressions. But for some of you on YouTube, you might not really know Humberto that well because you watch my other kind of stuff. But know that Humberto and I have been very close friends. You could argue best friends for about 20 years now. Before I even started the podcast, we were close friends and hung out all the time. And we bid in music projects together. We would play video games together, go to movies together. We would go to parties together. We'd go out together. And so there's a lot of friendship there and a lot of experiences. We share a lot in common. And we're both pretty strong-headed, and we like to stand our ground in debates. And we have had debates that have been pleasant, and we've had debates that have been argumentative and mean, and we've had personal conversations over the years that have been very conflictual. And there's been some notable fights over the years that were bigger than others and really threatened our relationship, particularly one that basically ended our relationship. And the only reason why we stayed in contact with each other is because we were doing the podcast, and that kept us in connection so that we could eventually come around with each other and repair the relationship. So without this podcast, I don't know if we'd be friends today, honestly, which really just breaks my heart. But my conclusion over the years, because I would wrestle with this in therapy and outside of therapy for myself as a client, that I concluded that although there are some unfortunate aspects of our relationship, that it's worth being in a relationship with him because there are so many good things about it. I concluded many years ago that if you're going to have attachments, if you're going to get close to someone, you're going to experience the negative side of their personality, and they're going to see the negative side of your personality. And there are going to be conflicts. There's going to be difficulty. If you get close to someone, that's just what's going to happen. So I concluded, well, I can either avoid difficulty and be lonely and have no close attachments, or I can have close attachments and deal with the difficulty as best as I can, in as healthy way as I can, and as a humble way as I can. So in this episode, we are actually referring to a past episode last month in which we had a fight there. It was a smaller fight, but it was a debate. And I thought I would play that clip from that previous episode. In this episode from last month, a patron emailed in a question about radical honesty with your partner. And Humberto was answering it in a way that says he used to have radical honesty, and it was very hurtful to his wife 25 years ago. He would comment on her clothing and put her down and insult her and hurt her feelings. And he's much better now. And so he was saying, I don't do that anymore. But the way he phrased it, he phrased it as though it sounded very similar to the way it was 25 years ago. He was phrasing it like, well, I still tell her how she should dress. I mean, that's not the word he used, but it was sort of in that camp. And whenever I'm podcasting, I always have part of my awareness in the shoes of the listener. I want to make sure that people aren't misunderstanding what we're saying. I also want to make sure that people don't attack Humberto, because sometimes people do attack him, and I'm protective of him because he's a dear, loved friend of mine. And sometimes he comes across like he doesn't really have feelings, or he's not sensitive, but he's very sensitive. And people will attack him. They'll be like, who's that Humberto guy? Like, get him off the podcast. And I'm like, hey, he's been with me from the beginning. 15 years ago, he was right there with me. I said, hey, you want to do this podcast together? And he was like, yes. And he's been there through thick and thin through 15 years. He always showed up. He never complained. He always had energy. And I've podcasted with a lot of people, and I have noticed over the years that Humberto is like the perfect colleague on a podcast. He has energy. He shows up. He chimes in. He has opinions. It's a really magical set of qualities that he has. And so when people attack him, I get defensive. And so as he's describing this in the episode from last month, I'm thinking, people are going to misinterpret what he's saying there. So I asked him this clarifying question, hoping that he would just answer in a way that would help him out, that would make it so people wouldn't misinterpret him and then attack him. But what happened was I was probably being too much of a dick, which is a problem of mine. I was being too pointed or judgmental or out of tone. And I know that's a problem of mine. If you listen to this podcast enough, you've heard me do it with Humberto and maybe others, particularly Humberto. And when I hear it back, I cringe times 100. It is just the worst. So I'm trying to help him, but I'm being a dick, and he digs in. And then it's no longer about the topic at hand, about his wife. He's now rejecting me. And that's how it felt to me at the time. It's like, oh, you're just being stubborn because you don't want to give in to me? What? And so I didn't really realize it at the time. We eventually realized it, but that's really what the fight is about. It's no longer about him and his wife. And also, this is not the first time this has happened. This dynamic between us has happened probably 50 times over 15 years, and most notably maybe like 5 or 6 times that were really difficult for the two of us, that really challenged this friendship. So although the two of us had felt like we had moved on from those fights, I think there were remnants of resentment and pain for both of us. And so when that dynamic happened, he dug in, and I was trying to help him, but I was hurt, and thus I was transferring that to anger, and I was being a dick even more. And like I said earlier, I was thinking about not publishing this because it's embarrassing, and I could feel my heart kind of racing already just thinking about it. It's hard. So anyway, let's listen to the clip from last month.
I give feedback to my wife. I've always given feedback to my wife when it came to fashion, like what she was wearing, right? And this is a controversial topic. It's like, dude, whatever she's wearing, you should just compliment her and say she looks great. And I've always disagreed. I was like, well, I mean, I feel like I should express my opinion. I think this would look better.
Well,
blah, blah, blah.
To be clear, the rule isn't either way. It's to have empathy and be a nice partner that supports each other. You can certainly be supportive of
You called that a rule, but I have been chastised by other people for saying something.
I know, and that's stupid because maybe some people actually want to be told the truth.
And now, look.
And you can tell the truth by being mean, or you can tell the truth by being nice. You can also withhold the truth and have it be mean and have that be nice. It depends.
Now, listen, I realized something, though, along the way. You've been to Colombia. You've seen my family. You've probably noticed they're very blunt. And if you didn't, maybe it's because they were speaking Spanish. But a lot of my family members, and maybe it's cultural.
Certain family members, for sure.
Yeah, okay, maybe not all, but a lot of them can be very blunt about many things all the time, as if they don't think others have feelings.
You'll tell me things that they'll say to you that I will be aghast about.
But it's not just to me, because I saw it to each other and to others. It's just a weird thing. It's
like,
cultural.
As soon as you get off the plane, they'll be like, oh, you're fat.
Yeah. And like when I was younger, they would say that to other people in my family, not me. And it's just, and about like hair colors and hairdresses and things, and like just like criticisms, blunt criticisms.
Oh, not compliments.
Right. Now, they would compliment sometimes, but blunt criticisms.
More criticism than compliments?
Probably. Okay. So there was a mix. Part of me still believes, and I still do it, that actually giving feedback is useful. So I still tell my wife, I'll be like, that doesn't go well together. I personally think you look much better in this other thing. And I stand by it. I don't feel it's right for me to say,
well, there's not a right or wrong.
No matter what you wear.
It's only right or wrong depending on how she feels about it. So how does she react to it?
I disagree.
You can do whatever you want depending on how it regardless of how it impacts other people. That's your point?
Yeah, to some extent. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so for the audio people, I'm going to play a little ding or something. I'll play a little chord over here. Okay, so when I play that chord, that indicates that I'm chiming in. I've listened to this 25 times or more, and it's still really hard for me to listen to. Especially the more I listen to it, the more I cringe at myself. So I feel like it's kind of important to drill down on this because we get into this later that Humberto, so he's talking about how he gives feedback. And I hope you can understand how I'm thinking, oh, he's not clarifying. And I feel like I'm lobbing the ball over the plate for him by saying, well, it's not really right or wrong. It just depends on how she feels about it. So how does she feel? And I thought he would say she's fine with it. In fact, she asks me for feedback about what she's wearing. And I would be like, oh, yeah. That's how I thought it would go. But he says, I disagree. And I probably should have asked him, I know that I should have asked him in a softer way, well, wait, no. Or I should have said something like, well, Humberto, I know that you're actually a nice husband, so just so the listeners understand, when you give feedback to your wife, you have to be clear to the listeners that she's okay with you. Yeah, I should have said something like that, but I didn't. I very quickly became a dick, and I'm guessing it has to do with the resentment that I wasn't really acknowledging of all the previous fights, because it feels like I went from 0 to 10 like right away. But anyway, so I say that, and I'm like, wait, so, and I raise my voice, and I'm like, you can do whatever you want. Now, Humberto should have absolutely said, oh, no, absolutely not. I absolutely would never give feedback to my wife if I thought it was hurting her feelings. He didn't say that, so we're both at fault, in my opinion. He could have easily ended the argument by just saying that, but he digs in because he's being stubborn, in my opinion. I wasn't helping. There's so many other ways. So I'm going to rewind it and listen to it. Because in the fight that we have in the episode that I'm going to play eventually, we're referring to this moment. So, okay, let's play the chord.
Part of me still believes, and I still do it, that actually giving feedback is useful. So I still tell my wife, I'll be like, that doesn't go well together. I personally think you look much better in this other thing. And I stand by it. I don't feel it's right for me to say,
well, there's not a right or wrong.
No matter what you wear.
It's only right or wrong depending on how she feels about it. So how does she react to it?
I disagree.
You can do whatever you want depending on how it regardless of how it impacts other people. That's your point?
Yeah, to some extent. Yeah. Yeah. When it comes to certain things. Like, for example...
It's fucking ridiculous.
Well, no.
You can say whatever you want to your wife about whatever she's wearing.
You're exaggerating.
That's literally what you just said.
No, you're taking it to the extreme, right? But look, we already do this. Don't you feel that you're on the street, someone does something like they pull on a dog too hard, the dog yips. Don't you feel like you should say something?
Depends.
Or fine, maybe that's a weird example, but like there's many cases in society where you will want to say something whether the other person likes it or not, no matter how the other person feels about it.
It's not the same, though.
Well, but there are those cases, right? To me, this is a case where, like, I'm okay if the person feels a little hurt.
But I'd like to know how she feels when you give her feedback about what she wears.
Well, originally, I'm sure it was horrible because I was modeling that other behavior, which was like hypercritical.
But currently,
I don't know.
You don't know how she feels when you give her feedback. You don't know.
I think the fact that over the years she has come to learn that I actually have a better sense than her as to what looks good on her, because I do a better job of buying things for her that look good on her. I think she's come to trust that maybe I have useful feedback, so she might trust it. And I no longer give harsh criticism.
Yeah.
And I now do things like, I actually couch it in a compliment. So I think that now it works.
Have you asked her?
But I haven't asked her.
I would ask her.
Sure. But I will stand by my behavior. I'll say like, no, I mean,
regardless of how she feels about it.
Yeah, because someone might feel bad about something that's their own issue, right? Like they might have their own.
It's their own body, my friend. It's their own clothes.
It's my own voice. It's my own body too.
Yikes.
No, dude. Like I don't know why this is so weird. Like basically,
it's not weird. It's mean.
No.
To do things without considering how it impacts other people is mean.
Guess what my wife tells me all the time?
What?
She admonishes me for not having taken my dishes to the sink. Does that feel good? I don't feel good when she does that.
It's an expectation the two of you are going to pull your own.
I don't feel. Does she ask me how I feel when she does it?
So you have full possession over her body and what she wears?
What? No, wait. You're changing subjects. When she admonishes me for not taking the dishes to the dish.
The two of you have possession over the chores and the dishes in your house.
No, I'm saying I don't question her bringing that up, and I don't expect her to ask me how I feel about it.
It's terrible that you equate those two things.
But it's weird that you don't see the connection, that you don't understand that she's entitled to criticize me and
about
how I
the
feel,
dishes.
Well, about many things.
What if she criticized you for the way you talk about the way she dresses? What if she said you're an asshole for the way you tell me about it? She can't do that.
Actually,
hey, Berto, she has
what
thoughts.
She said yesterday?
Berto, she has opinions, and you're wrong, so she gets to make whatever she wants to say.
You know what she said yesterday to me? She said, "Oh my gosh, what did you eat yesterday?" I'm like, why? Last night, like you were so garlicky while you were asleep.
How does her dressing in a fashionable way that is not in line with what you want her to wear?
How does me eating whatever I want to eat finish this?
Because it impacts her.
Because it impacts me.
An outfit she picks out of the closet for herself.
Yeah.
Impacts you.
Yeah.
How?
Well, first of all, we are a couple, right? I want her to be her best. I want us to live a happy life together. I am a visual person. I love looking at nicer things. So it has an impact on me. I mean, this isn't the hill I die on, but it's like, it's a thing. And how does the dishes impact her? Oh, well, she's got to do dishes. It's more work for her. It's true. So, I mean, both things impact both of us, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we'll let the listeners decide.
Oh, I already know what the feedback would be. But my point is this, that I still think that it's okay to tell someone that you have an opinion about what they do or have or don't have.
Regardless of how it makes them feel.
Well, so in that level, it's like, no, look, of course not. I already stated that I grew over the years because of how she felt, right? It's just that I don't every day check in with her on everything I say or do about how she felt about it. Neither does she. And therefore, there's a little bit of a guessing game.
Yeah, I'm not contending that she doesn't appreciate it. I'm just contending with what you were saying, that you have the right to say whatever you want to.
Well, I think your roommate has the right to say what they want to.
Because you thought it.
But I think your roommate had the right to say what they wanted to.
No one has everyone should consider how other people are impacted by what they're saying.
Yes, but they still have the right to say what they want to say.
Yes, under the law, they can say whatever the fuck they want. But they as a human being with morals, they should find out how the other person feels and confirm that it's not harming them.
Yeah, but you don't do that with every statement all the time with everything, right? Like, you don't follow every statement with how did that make you feel?
No.
Right.
But with the bigger ones, the repetitive ones, you check in now and then.
Sure. And that's why people grow over time. That's why I don't do what I used to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so deep breath. Deep breath for myself. Okay, so this has a happy ending. I have to reassure myself that. You can reassure yourself that as well. So in this episode, you just heard that clip, and we just moved on with the episode. And I remember at the time feeling completely fine with the fact that we had that debate/fight. Humberto was also fine. In terms of the kinds of fights that we've had or discussions or debates, that one was actually minor. And we have a lot of trust between the two of us, having recovered from a lot of these kinds of interactions, that we both knew the other person wasn't going to hold it against us or was okay with just agreeing to disagree and moving on. And then after we stopped recording, we had a lot of pleasant interactions. It just was a non-issue. And when we published that episode last month, a lot of the listeners were actually happy to hear that people can have a debate, can have an uncomfortable interaction, a fight, if you will, and still be friends and agree to disagree and move on with life. Because so often that's not how those things end, right? Like I said earlier, if you get close to someone, you're going to get annoyed with them. If you're not annoyed with your close relationships, you're not close enough. That's just the fact. I challenge anyone to prove to me otherwise, because no one's perfect and no relationship is perfect. So it's just a part of being close to people. So there were two reactions to the episode, and some people had both reaction. One reaction was, like I said earlier, that people were like, oh, it's nice to see that people can disagree and still be friends. We don't always see that. And the other reaction was a lot of people having varying levels of reaction against Humberto, saying things like, hey, Humberto, we love you and we love your honesty, and the way you're talking is not okay or not cool or uncaring or sexist or something. And then there were some people that were very upset at Humberto. So when the episode came out, Humberto and I were talking about the reaction, and he, in my perception, was upset about it. But because he feels like he has to protect other people from his problems, he tries to come across like he doesn't have needs, and that's part of his trauma. So at first, I just figured he'd be okay with it. But as time went on, I started to he was talking. Usually, when we publish an episode, even if it had a lot of drama to it, he doesn't really say much about it. But this episode, he was, over a number of days, it would come up in conversation. He'd be like, well, another thing. And once we were done with the episode, I just didn't really care to get into it with him, because I just figured we're just gonna start fighting about it again, and what's the point in that? So he would try to engage with me, and I'd be like, well, and I would apologize to him, because I felt bad for him, because I felt like people were being mean to him. And so I said, I apologize if you felt like I threw you under the bus, and I can certainly take it down, or should I not have published that? And he was like, no, it's good that it's up, but I just feel like I have more to say about it. So I said, well, do you want to do another episode about it? Do you want to do a check-in? And he was like, yeah. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because he doesn't usually want that. So we had this conversation. I'd be like, okay, as a part of a larger episode, I will, in the middle of the episode, I'll just throw to you, Humberto, and say, hey, what do you have to say about the episode in which you talked about commenting on your wife's clothes? And I thought he would say, okay, I just have to clarify that I misspoke. I should have established, and I never did for some reason, that my wife actually asks me for feedback on her clothes. And of course, I know that I'm not hurting her feelings because of the way that we interact, the way that I don't ask her explicitly how she feels, but I just know, because we're close and I've been with her for 3 decades or almost, or 25 plus years. I just know that she would tell me if it bothered her. And also she continues to ask me what she thinks of an outfit or something. And I just know that I'm not mean to her. I just say, hey, and I try to, so I should have clarified that, but I got stubborn, or I dug in, or I don't know, I got frazzled, and I just didn't mention that. That's all. That's what I thought he would say. I thought for sure that's what he would say. That's not what happened, though. The fight just started all over again, and I became a dick again. But the difference was, this time, I think I just wanted to find a solution, and I wanted to see it through to the end. And I didn't really think that it would resolve, but, because I'm in charge of the podcast, so if something goes off the rails, I can change the subject and be like, well, let's move on because we've got other things to talk about, and Humberto will go along with that. Or in the middle, sometimes of recording, I'll be like, this has got off the rails, Berto, so I'm just I'm going to edit this whole thing out. I'm glad we had the conversation, but let's just move on because we only have so much time to record. So, that'll happen sometimes. And I could have done that, but for some reason I didn't. I'm not sure why, but I'm so glad that I did. So deep breath, people. This one's a lot longer. This is like a whole hour of us fighting and resolving. But remember, it ends well. We cry, we hug it out, we say we love each other, and Humberto has a breakthrough. Let's watch and listen. But first, let's take a little break. Okay, we're back from the break. So, Berto.
Yeah.
We had an episode a while back, 6 weeks ago or something, and we were answering emails, and
Kirk and Humberto fight.
Yeah.
Are we about to fight again?
I mean, I wouldn't consider it a fight.
I know, but you titled it.
Yeah.
Kirk and Humberto fight.
And
I got nothing but love on that episode.
Yeah. So he says with sarcasm, for those who don't know or remember, someone asked a question that prompted us to talk about.
It was about brutal honesty. Like
Okay.
the question was generally, do you think brutal honesty is a good thing?
Oh.
I gave a kind of long-winded answer. I think I did a poor job of representing my answer, and then people also did a poor job of understanding my answer.
So to summarize for people, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting, but you had brought up the example that with your wife, you will give her feedback on her outfit. You're dressing up to go out or something.
Well, I initially used it as an example of how I used to think brutal honesty was a good thing because
Right.
I grew up in an environment where brutal honesty was the default.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't a good thing.
Right. And then you said that you had graduated to a better place where you also give her feedback. And then as you were talking, I thought, well, that sounds good. And given my knowledge of you and your wife and your relationship, I asked a question figuring you would answer in the way that would clarify in a way for the audience so that they would be on board with what you were saying. I asked the question, so
Do you ask how she feels?
or do you know how she feels about this feedback, this different version of feedback? You're still giving her feedback, but it's not as pointed or something.
Right.
And I figured you'd say, oh yeah. I always, try to make sure that I'm not hurting her feelings, or I'll say, would you like some feedback? Or I thought you might even say, she literally really wants my opinion because she just, two heads are better than one. I do that all the time. I'll get dressed up and I'll look at Stacy and I'll be like, what do you think? And she's like, and I'll be like, oh, okay. So I thought you would say something along those lines, but then you were adamant about it didn't matter and you shouldn't have to care about that. But I was like, yeah, but you do care about how she feels about this feedback, right? And you're like, no, why should I care? Because, she gives me feedback about putting away the dishes, and if it bothers
but
me,
see, that's not. And I understand why.
Literally what you said.
No, but it was what happens, and I understand most people don't debate, so fine. Like, I get it. I was being argumentative. It's just that sometimes it's good to draw a boundary and say, look, is this a situation that would never be okay? Or are there some cases where it is okay? If the situations would never be okay, then there's basically no point in arguing, because that means that there's no example ever where this could be okay. If there's a boundary we can find, then we can talk about how far from that boundary we can be.
Okay. But all you had to say, and I kept lobbing the ball over the plate for you to take a swing at the statement that I would say, but of course you wouldn't say it to her if you knew it hurt her feelings, right? And you were like, that doesn't matter.
But it doesn't for the context that I was going for, which I didn't explain.
And I was like, wow. So regardless of how she feels about it, and you said, I have the right to say. I was like, yeah, you have the right to. There's nothing
right, because
illegal.
at that point it became a semantic / philosophical argument. Yes.
Yeah.
But here's the behind. If you look behind the curtain, imagine you're just telling a story and you say like, well, I was cooking dinner and I asked Stacy, Stacy was cooking dinner and she asked me if she thought the chicken was done enough, and I said no. And I'm like listening to your story and I go, did you ask her how she felt about that?
It's different though.
Hold on, right? In your mind, would you think that's the kind of thing you would ever need to ask her about?
It's a different situation.
But fine, but I'm asking you about that situation. Would you think it's the kind of thing you would ever need to ask her about?
If you asked me that question, of course.
Because she might take a lot of pride in her cooking, right? But either way,
well, if the chicken's going to kill us because it's undercooked.
But it's just an everyday conversation. Like, she's just cooking. She's like, hey, do you think this is cooked? And you're like, no, I don't think so. It's not the kind of conversation in every day that you would think, well, I should probably ask her how that made her feel.
Well,
Right, because I mean, most people, especially if they're asking that question, and I know my wife, she wouldn't have her feelings hurt if I said it wasn't cooked
exactly.
enough.
And then to translate
But
it to
people
the
are
clothes.
pretty sensitive about
let's say she's
the way
getting
they
dressed and she goes like, do you think this top goes with these pants? And you go, I think the blue one might go more.
But that's not the way you framed it.
Hold on. But would you, if I then said, did you ask her how it makes her feel?
Well, I know how it makes her feel because
Exactly.
we've had conversations.
Because you have context about your relationship.
Well, I
It's
literally
not, you
will
didn't
ask
just meet
her.
yesterday.
I will literally will ask her, is it okay if I tell you how I, or I'll give her feedback and I'll be like, how does that? No, not every
you
time.
Don't do that every time.
But
you established
for years
that over
and years and years.
Right. Obviously, I did too.
But you didn't say that.
I did.
You didn't.
I literally.
You literally didn't. We can go to the tape. I was desperate for you to say something because I wanted to save you. Okay, so deep breaths. I'm chiming in here so that you can take a deep. Know that this resolves. Check in with your body. Make sure you're not being triggered. This could absolutely be triggering. And also know that I totally recognize how much of a dick I'm being, and it's humiliating to me. But another word for it is to be humble and to recognize that I'm not perfect. And if I'm going to grow, then I have to acknowledge that I have flaws, and I shouldn't hide that from the world. That I should put that out there. I'm a little worried about putting it out there. Also, I suppose there's a bit of modeling that I can provide that, people have flaws and it's okay that I have flaws, right? And it's absolutely okay that you have flaws as well. We can have shame. I have shame about this. I think shame is actually a good thing. Of the things we feel ashamed about, there's about 1% of those things are actually healthy to have. The vast majority of things we feel ashamed about, like the way that we look or the color of our skin or how much money we make, is actually completely imposed from the outside. But I think that there's a very small portion of things that we feel ashamed about that is actually useful. And for me to feel ashamed of being a dick to Humberto is useful. That cringe, that cold feeling I get in my core of like, oh God, that's motivating to me. That motivates me to change that and to not do that again, because I don't want to feel that shame and I don't want to hurt other people's feelings. So I feel shame, and in order to feel that shame so that I can be motivated to change and apologize, then I have to really just look at my behavior. And a big part of me acknowledging my behavior is actually publishing it, because it certainly makes it real, and people might shame me and I might deserve to be shamed. I'd say that I do, when people are being dicks when they could otherwise not be a dick. Hurtful is another word for it. I think that behavior deserves to be pointed out in a way of saying, hey, that's not okay. Do we call it shame? Do we call it guilt? Do we call it concern for other people? I don't know. But so check in with yourself. And also I want to play the clip from last month to kind of remind, because I've been yammering, but I just want to play a bit of that clip again, because we're debating exactly what we said. So I want to remind the listeners. So I'll play the chord again here. So this is last month.
Part of me still believes, and I still do it, that actually giving feedback is useful. So I still tell my wife, I'll be like, that doesn't go well together. I personally think you look much better in this other thing. And I stand by it. I don't feel it's right for me to say,
well, there's not a right or wrong.
No matter what you wear.
It's only right or wrong depending on how she feels about it. So how does she react to it?
I disagree.
You can do whatever you want depending on how it regardless of how it impacts other people. That's your point?
Yeah, to some extent. Yeah. Yeah. When it comes to certain things. Like, for example...
It's fucking ridiculous.
Well, no.
You can say whatever you want to your wife about whatever she's wearing.
You're exaggerating.
That's literally what you just said.
No, you're taking it to the extreme, right? But look, we already do this. Don't you feel that you're on the street, someone does something like they pull on a dog too hard, the dog yips. Don't you feel like you should say something?
Depends.
Or fine, maybe that's a weird example, but like there's many cases in society where you will want to say something whether the other person likes it or not, no matter how the other person feels about it.
It's not the same though.
Well, but there are those cases, right? To me, this is a case where like I'm okay if the person feels a little hurt.
But I'd like to know how she feels when you give her feedback about what she wears.
Well, originally, I'm sure it was horrible because I was modeling that other behavior, which was like hypercritical.
But currently,
I don't know.
You don't know how she feels when you give her feedback. You don't know.
I think the fact that over the years she has come to learn that I actually have a better sense than her as to what looks good on her, because I do a better job of buying things for her that look good on her.
Okay, chiming in. So we just listened to that clip from last month again, and now we're going to listen to the whole rest of this episode in which Humberto and I escalate in our fight. And then I actually intuit at some point that if I slow down and exhibit softness and actually exhibit empathy and humility myself, I thought maybe he would follow suit, and he does in a really big way. And also know that my upsettedness, my anger, my dickishness is not related necessarily to what we are talking about consciously. It is related to 20 years of occasional fights of different degrees with him and the hurt that I felt. And I hadn't really identified what that was. So it doesn't excuse it, but my energy around this is because of that ongoing resentment that never was resolved. There were a number of fights that I had with Humberto, and we did resolve it kind of, but I never felt like he acknowledged that the topic at hand that we were fighting about wasn't actually what was happening emotionally. What was happening emotionally was the rejection vibe that you get from someone, that stubborn rejection of like, and the message that I think I was receiving over the years, and pointedly in this moment as well, is I don't love you enough, I don't care about you enough to let your ideas into my head. I don't, again, I'm not looking for people to agree with me. So the fight escalates because of this underlying pain of feeling rejected, and me, right? He feels rejected by me because I'm trying to convince him of something. I'm trying to, I guess you could say I'm doing the same thing. Like I'm not letting his ideas into my head, right? I'm not being kind to him. And so the topic at hand is not what we're fighting about. It's this underlying feeling of hurt and pain and rejection. That's what's really happening. So, all right.
The phrase you are looking for, you're not going to find it. But I'm trying to explain to you.
The phrase you just said is the phrase, one of the phrases I was trying to save you, Berto.
No, I'm trying to explain to you why. If you had
said that, the listeners wouldn't have reacted the way that they did.
The way I felt, if I could do things over, what I would have done is I would have said, well, no, of course I think you're misunderstanding what I'm talking about. I mean, like, nowadays, she might be getting dressed and she might say, does this belt work with this skirt? And I will say, no, or yes, or maybe, and that's fine. And of course I don't say, how did that make you feel? Because that's not the kind of thing I would ever say that about. Because people don't say that.
But right? If you didn't know how she felt, if there was a question, and I don't know, I don't know her well enough.
But that's not the kind of thing that you would, because it's like, she asked me in the first place.
But
right?
You didn't say, for example, I know by context, I know by our relationship that she's okay with me giving her feedback on that. If you just would have said that, I would have, because I figured there was something like that. I don't think that you just walk around doing things that are intending on harming
other people.
But that's all you had to say was just like, I'm fairly certain she's okay with the feedback I give.
I am
but you didn't say that. The hard line you were drawing was, it doesn't matter.
Right.
That's what you said. It doesn't matter how she feels about it.
Yes.
That's literally what you said.
Look, my mistake was that I didn't pause there and say, look, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm talking about. I'm not saying about her walking out into the living room and I'm going, you're not wearing that tonight, are you? I'm talking about literally an everyday exchange nowadays, because this is not how I was when I was 20, 30 years ago. It's me simply giving an opinion that she asked for, because she's grown to trust that I kind of have an opinion that she values, right? Right?
Yeah.
I didn't pause this and say, that's all I'm talking about.
You literally said, it doesn't matter how she feels about it. I'm going to give her feedback anyway. You said that.
Yeah, and I'm standing by that. Because
that's not what you're saying now, though. You're saying something different.
No, I'm standing by look, the thing I'm admitting 100% culpability in is, first of all, I am throwing some culpability away to say, look, I was trying to make a point. You asked kind of a derailing question, and it got us.
Derailing question?
Yeah.
I was trying to help you.
No, because what I was trying to say is look, I used to use brutal honesty. I realized it's not good. Now I don't. That's all I was trying to say.
but you also said other things. Can you just admit that you made a mistake?
No, you
didn't.
Just did.
You've literally never said that you made a mistake.
I made a mistake.
Just say
that in that moment. I don't need people to agree with me. I'm just standing by my answer. It's just that I didn't clarify the scenario I was talking about, which is
it's really hard for you to admit you did something wrong.
It's not when I feel I did something wrong. Like,
it's really hard.
But you want me to admit that I did something wrong. I'm
trying to save you again.
I'm telling you what
I'm trying to help you.
I know, but I'm telling you what I feel I did wrong. What I feel I did wrong is I didn't pause and say, look, I think you're misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Why?
what I don't think I did wrong is
Why didn't you? Why didn't you pause it?
I was trying to make one point, which was simply brutal honesty is something I used to do because of the way I was raised. Mm-hmm. I learned over the years that wasn't good, and I no longer do it, right? That's the point I was trying to make. The conversation we went into, and my fault in it is that I decided to get argumentative instead of just being like, okay, I see what he's asking. I understand that he thinks what he's, but it's not.
I
really
didn't think anything, Berto. I thought you would have a good answer.
No, because you wouldn't have asked that question.
I did think you were going to answer the question in a way that was going to help you.
But would you honestly?
I don't think negative things about you.
Would you honestly have asked
that assumption
question?
Is what led to the whole argument. You were pushing back because you thought you were pushing it back. I was trying to help.
But let me ask you, would you
That's interesting that you distorted that.
Would you have asked that question if I had said, nowadays, all I do is when she's putting on effort, in the occasion when she does that we're about to go out and she asks for my opinion, I give her my opinion in a way that's empathetic and blah.
I wouldn't have asked the question.
Exactly. I didn't set it up that way. So I admit fault. Like I just said like nowadays I just do it in a more empathetic way or whatever I said.
You didn't say that.
Well, I definitely used the word empathy at some point during the debate because I remember saying like, but in either case, I admit that I didn't explain well what I mean by what I do that now. So I didn't contrast what I used to do, what I do now.
I think you distorted what I was intending based on some displacement.
But now put yourself...
And you decided to fight with me because you were trying to win when I was trying to help.
Sure, fair. But
because I was thinking, as we were talking about it, I have one ear or one part of my head in the listener's head. And as you were talking, I'm like, they're going to want that to be clarified, especially women listening, hearing a man giving feedback. So I was like, I'll help Berto and I'll ask him this simple question and he'll say, oh yeah, sure. You know, of course I care about my wife. I don't want her.
But I don't like lying is the thing is when you ask me a question, like, do you ask her how she feels? I could lie to make myself look great and say, I totally do.
But then I quickly went to a different, more fundamental question, which is,
right.
Do you care how she feels? And you said, I don't care how she feels.
And I will admit that this is where I got pedantic about the philosophy of it, which is that, no.
Pedantic / argumentative.
I still don't care how she feels.
You don't care?
Listen, I don't. If she asked me, how does this belt, do you think this belt works with this skirt?
But that's not the premise that you were giving in the moment.
But that is how I was approaching.
I didn't know that was the premise.
And I admit that I fucked up.
If you had described to me a scenario where she asked for an opinion.
Right, of course you wouldn't have asked, right.
I'd be like, well, yeah, she's asking for your opinion.
Think about how I was trying to simply make a point that I thought was going to be uncontroversial. Brutal honesty, I grew up with it, I learned it was bad, now I don't do that.
Right, you were talking about how your family will say you're fat and that hurts your feelings, and you're just like, I don't want to be like that. It would have ended
there. Now, when you said, and I said, now I just, I'll give her my opinion, but it's not brutal honesty, or however I phrase it. When you said, do you ask her how she feels? In my head, what happened, the short circuit that happened is instead of me going like, oh, well, no, I don't mean like I say like, that dress doesn't fit you. I mean literally like what the scenario I just described, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of that, the short circuit that happened is like, no, of course I don't. Because I was picturing that scenario going, why would I ask her how she feels after she just asked me? I was thinking about it from a different perspective. I'm like, if I could have used more words, I would have said, great question, not my point. Let me finish my point. That's what I would have said. Instead, I said, no. And then that's when you double clicked on my answer. You wanted me to keep answering your question.
I was trying to help you, Berto.
But
I wanted you to be seen well by the audience. I don't want to hang you out to dry.
I don't care if they disagree. I was trying to be honest. And no,
but you weren't being comprehensive about.
Fair, and I agree. I admit.
You were doing a thing that you do sometimes, Berto, which is you dig in,
but
in an argumentative way and no one's arguing with you.
Well, you were.
I wasn't. I was trying to help you.
Well, you might have been trying to help me. It was still an argument. And you didn't let me
It was upsetting to hear someone, I don't care who it is, say they act in ways without caring how other people feel. That's upsetting.
But that is why I gave the stupid dishes example. Because there are many cases in life where you do things whether the other person likes it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I get that that's just philosophy and stuff, but it is true. So in my mind, if someone asked me for their thoughts and I carefully and empathetically gave those thoughts and they don't like my answer, then I don't care.
You didn't say that though.
I know.
You didn't say she asked. You never said she asked.
I wasn't trying to have a debate with you. I was trying to finish my point.
I wasn't trying to have a debate. You made it into an argument. I was like, wow. I said, yikes. Because I'm like, really? That's your position? I just thought it doesn't fit my perception of you. Why are you saying this?
Well, it's easy. Listen, it's always easy in an argument to take a high road with any topic. And then if the other person's saying something that doesn't
It's not a high road to assume that you have empathy.
Right.
Berto.
That is like to say, look, I'm on the side that says you should check in with people and have empathy. If the other person is arguing anything that doesn't sound like that, of course it's going to be an uphill, kind of unwinnable battle. But I didn't think that that's what I was doing. I thought of it like, look, there are times in life where you need to say things. If the other person doesn't like it, that's tough. And that's not the point I'm trying to make. I was trying to make this other point. And I felt derailed.
What point were you trying to make? Say the point.
Brutal honesty is something I learned by my society, that I learned over years that was not a good approach, and that I no longer employ brutal honesty. That was it.
Okay. And that is good. And I know that you care about your wife, and I know that your wife is not, I don't know this particular topic, but hung out with you a lot, and knowing what I know about your wife, I can't imagine that she's like harboring some sort of resentment about you giving feedback about the way she dresses.
I would expect that she still does from when we were young.
Okay, well maybe, but not currently. No. And that's the vision I have of you. And so that's why I was trying to elicit that from you, but you kept arguing with me.
But if that's the vision you have, that's inconsistent with you asking me if I ask her how she feels.
I literally thought you would say, I have asked her and she is okay with it. But all you had to say in that moment is, well, she literally asks me for feedback. That's all you had to say. And I would have been like, oh, okay.
I'm not disagreeing that I handled it poorly. It's just that if you took all that for granted, then we would have fast forwarded to
the listeners don't take it for granted.
Okay, but that question, maybe if the question would have been like, so, Berto, it sounds like along your journey, you must have asked her how she felt about that feedback. And then I would have said, oh, I didn't have to ask her. She told me, and it was clear. And it was clear I was hurting her.
I don't know.
I had to learn, and blah, blah, blah.
Maybe if...
No, I would have absolutely, because that's what happened. That's literally what happened. It's just that nowadays, that is a non-factor. But because that behavior never happens now.
I would encourage you to listen to it again and try to imagine what you are distorting in the way that, and I will too. I'll put this on myself as well, because I was there and I also listened to it probably 5 times. One is just the normal part of me reviewing the content, but I'll do it again.
There's 3 portions to it.
But I encourage you for my sake, I request, Berto, for our relationship, that you humbly try to answer the question as to how you might have, given your pattern or your susceptibility or your traumas or something, you jumped to conclusions in your head. I know,
and I admit it, and I told you, see, you're not hearing that. I said, I fucked up. I should have paused and said, I think you're misinterpreting the situation. Here's what I'm talking about.
But
right?
The fact that you didn't, I think, is based on a distortion of what you thought I was saying when I was asking a question to you. Because this is not the first time this has happened. That when I'm trying to have a conversation and you come at me with this combativeness, it's hurtful, and it's like I have good thoughts of you, and so it's
But look,
and the fact that you can't have just the care for me to
now. The context is what would have been helpful for me to say, well, like, look, I'm not talking about her walking out, me going, that's not walking out of this house, girly, and her going, hi, I'm sad. I'm like, I don't care about your feelings. I'm talking about, how do you think this blouse works with this thing? And me going, I think it works, or I think this other one. And me, quote, not caring how she felt about that answer, and second, not asking her how she cared.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Right.
And so today,
You are representing
Right.
how you feel about it. Last time, you were not.
And so,
because you were trying to fight with me.
And I'm agreeing. And I'm apologizing for the fight. I'm apologizing for how I didn't stop and say, wait, let me clarify, right? I agree that I got argumentative and semantic, blah, blah. I agree with all that. I am also asking you, because what happens is, and maybe because we know this about me, just like think of it as a disability. Because we know this about me. When I am on a roll, kind of trying to make a point, sometimes when you ask a question and I say, and I give you a quick answer, I might not have put in all the thought of all the consequences of giving you that answer. Okay. And that was one of those cases because I wasn't thinking of your question like, first of all, this is where I think you're wrong. I wasn't thinking of your question as being malicious at all. I simply heard it and I answered realistic or honestly, which was no. But let me get back to my point. I didn't say those words, but that was what I was trying to do.
Okay.
And then in that moment when we derailed, because you were like, whoa, what do you mean no? Then I was like, then I got on the defensive, which is my fault.
Right.
But
because I was whoa, because I was like, wait, what? And so I guess I could apologize for, because I hold on, I'm apologizing, is I can be a dick. I don't know any other phrase. And my tone can be mean, dickish. And another person, maybe even you, would have toned it differently, would have been like, well, Berto, I know that you care, and I'm sure there's a good answer to this, but I'm worried that, at least for me, you're misrepresenting the full picture, and I'm worried about that.
Yeah.
So to be clear, you're not walking around hurting her feelings by giving her feedback,
and
right?
then not caring. Right?
Yeah. If I would have done that, then that would have probably set things right. But I wasn't. I was being a dick.
To let you off the hook, even because that's a lot to have to couch, right?
But there's a million other ways I could have said it other than the tone that I had. I'm
saying, yeah, thank you, and I appreciate it. And again, as I said, I apologize because I realized everything past that point, that initial question, the rest of it was me fighting uselessly to kind of like defeat this point so I could get back to this other thing. And I realized that that's confusing, first of all, because I can understand most of the feedback from you listeners, not all, some of it was like ridiculously out of context mean, but that was the tiny minority. But most of the feedback was them just literally reacting to what they heard. And in the context they heard it going, yeah, that sounds wrong. And I can't fault them for it. That's why I took the time to write out like, well, here's what I was trying to say, right? But I understand no one's going to watch and necessarily go read all the freaking comments. So I get it. So I apologize to you and the listeners for saying, hey, in that moment, instead of like doubling down into an argument and being like, well, no, and kind of essentially being, how do I call it, pedantic or something, like where, because in my head, I know that the thing that I'm arguing is technically correct, without giving all the context, I'm still going to stand by that thing. There is something argumentative and unnecessary about that, and I apologize.
And hurtful. And you've done this to me before. One of the biggest traumas of my friendship life was a much bigger version of this, and we're not going to go into it, obviously, but it was 14 years ago.
The politics?
No. It was... it was sitting in my car.
Okay, that one, yes.
Outside of your house.
Yes.
And it was exactly this. It was a different topic.
No,
but
actually,
you were
that's
digging
a great
in.
example. Without details, what happened is that I deviated from what I should have realized in that moment is like, what is necessary right now for our relationship and what I owe my friend is for me to not care about the details here and the semantics and the things and the arguments and just say, hey, listen, I'm sorry, and just listen to you, right? Like, I get that, right? That part of me that is argumentative and likes to think logically and button all the hatches, right? That part of me was like, well, technically, there's this other argument I want to make, and because blah, blah, blah. And that was definitely at play here.
And that time it mushroomed into literally us basically not being friends.
Right.
And if it weren't for you and I being tied to this podcast, we would not be talking today.
Right.
It would have been over. It was a really hurtful thing.
Right.
And it was in this vein where it was like, and I kept trying to give you a lifeline, like, yeah, but you can't, like, or don't you care? And you'd be like, no, I don't care, because I have this principle, and I have the right to do it. And I was just like, okay, yeah, but it hurts me that you're doing that. Could you please not? And you're like, it doesn't matter that it hurts you, and and I was like, but believe that you can be flexible on this. Like, can you please just not? And you're like, you can't make me. I see it from my point of view,
right?
But
like you're playing me very mean, and you're playing yourself very nice.
Well, okay, so
Right.
I'll add that I was eventually getting heated, probably.
No,
right?
but actually, what I was trying to get at is, I think the reason you do that is because when I get into these arguments, I do play a persona, which is, I think people misinterpret it, and it's not their fault, as like, oh, you're getting personal against me, where I'm actually playing the persona of someone arguing the point. And I am not. Now, that one particular thing had a lot of like extra layers of emotions and things, but I'm talking about in general. So like when I'm saying like, no, it shouldn't matter, someone's opinion should be blah, 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 I'm actually literally just on a stage debating, trying to just win a point. And I'm not trying to hurt someone's feelings, even if I end up doing that. And I understand how it comes off, or I can understand how it can come off like, wait, why are you being so mean? Or why are you...
Well, particularly without rehashing 14 years ago, I was explicitly making a request and I thought was reasonable. And I don't even know if I was making a request as much as I just wanted you to say that it was okay that I had the feelings I had. I might have even been reducing it to that point, or that I wanted to know if you cared, that it was affecting me. And, we talked at least for an hour sitting there. I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but I just, why am I bringing this up? I don't know. I guess I would, you don't have to, and it's probably a minor thing overall, but some softness, I think would benefit your stress level and your relationships. And me too. I'm in this direction, but I do find that there's a liberation in the middle of a, argument or something, saying, even though it doesn't feel like this is possible or rational, I'm probably wrong, and it's such a liberating, free place to be for me. Yeah. If you don't do it, it's not going to change things that much, and you could argue I'm just saying this to be selfish because I want you to somehow give in to me, but that isn't at least my conscious intent.
The aspect that because after this happened, I asked you for a favor, and the aspect that I asked you was, and I do think re-listening to it is part of it, because even though I didn't assume the question was malicious, the way you posed it was, have you asked her how she feels?
Okay.
And part of that is why I think dismissed and tried to move on, because I'm like, no, like, because there's like kind of like that's not the point I'm trying to make. That was kind of what I was thinking, right? I think,
well, but let's drill down on it.
Yeah.
Let's say that I did ask in that way, and it might have even been worse than that. I don't know. I don't imagine that the foundation of your experience, having heard that tone question, that the question with that tone, was, that's not the point I'm trying to make. I imagine it's deeper than that. It's more insulting or something hurtful to you.
Well, because, okay, so keep this in mind. My role that I play here often is I expose myself a lot, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it makes me very vulnerable, because I admit often, like, I screwed up in this big way. Look at this horrible thing that's ugly.
Yeah, way more than I do. Way more than I do.
And then oftentimes, not always, because sometimes I'm like, and I'm still struggling with it. But oftentimes I'm like, but I did a lot of work. I did therapy. I learned. And then now I don't, or I have this or whatever. And I try to craft that narrative because both it's true, and also because I'm trying to give the audience a sense of like there's hope, right? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
No. The audience recently responded overwhelmingly positive, which I was very happy for. I hope you saw the Patreon comments of people, giving you, and it always warms my heart when y'all do that as an audience for Berto, because, I get a lot of love because I do a lot of content and people are nice to me, and you don't give off the vibe of needing positive feedback, so I don't think you get it as much. So it was really nice, and that's always been the case. People are like, "Oh my God, I can't." I think it's bad what Berto is revealing, but what a wonderful thing that he's doing that, and I like Berto, so I give him the benefit of the doubt. And how many people on the internet would admit something like that? So yeah, it's a huge deal.
And so the favor I ask is that because I'm exposing myself so much and being so vulnerable, especially in the part of my narratives where we get to the now, right? I ask for your help in, if you're gonna like ask me a question like that, think that it might make me feel like I'm still not there. Because I'm telling this narrative but have you I'm not saying you said the word but like, have you asked her how she feels? In that moment, there is probably a part of me that went, yes, but that's not the point.
Well, but to this is how I think. What's the emotion?
There's a mix. Part of it is feeling like
emotion, not statement.
Oh, okay. There was frustration, and there was, I don't know how to, sadness or
what kind of sadness?
Well, I'm retrospectively analyzing it. The frustration is easier to explain. I'm like, no, I'm not talking. The sadness is like, I've grown. I'm not
insulting.
At that point anymore.
Looking down on you, insulting.
I guess, yeah.
Hurtful.
Yeah. And again, I know you don't mean it. I didn't think you meant it in the moment. But I think that's how I felt. And so therefore I was like, no. I don't care about how, no. It was just like,
well,
we're no longer at the point where your question is as relevant, even though your question is right. And yes, of course, through this process, I had to confront with how the heck my behavior makes her feel. And I had to be like, whoa, my behavior is hurtful. And why do I behave this way? Oh, I was hurt. Oh, yeah, all that stuff, right? Of course. It's just that in the moment, what I really felt was, oh, I'm still not good enough. Again, I'm retrospectively analyzing. I'm not saying that all went through my head consciously. But
oh, well, it doesn't usually go through our minds consciously.
So I think maybe that's part of why I was also trying to get it away. I'm like, no, I'm fine now. What are you doing? Stop psychoanalyzing me. My point was, blah.
Well, that makes total sense, bro. Yeah. And thank you for saying that.
So I apologize. I will work on this because it's not just about this. You're right. It is a pattern. I would say it's less frequent, but I don't even know if that's true. It is a pattern. Sometimes certain things trigger me down argumentative rabbit holes. And I could see how it would hurt people. Sorry.
I'm going to cry.
Crying is not masculine. Oh, wait, it is.
I'm crying. Because it's not just this one, Berto. Like, and I'm saying a good thing. Because, there's... Berto's coming over to hug me. And Berto, you don't like hugging.
I love hugging. I've come to love hugging.
Well, that was an actual non-standoffish hug. That was a real hug. Because, I love you as a brother and a best friend. Jesus Christ.
I love you, man.
And you going down that road with me and
revealing that to me, that you were hurt, and apologizing, is repairing a lot for me. I don't carry resentment. Not much.
No,
anyway.
we do. We carry resentment. People
But
do. And
it doesn't get in the way of my affection for you. Because there's been, repair. And you've said before about the 14 years ago thing. You've said before. What?
Dude.
What?
I mean, it's so simple, but that is really my father, man.
I've been thinking it the whole time,
That's
Berto.
my dad.
It's obvious. I didn't
so
want to say it
obvious.
because it is so obvious.
Because he would die on a hill.
I know. I'm glad you brought it up because
And you know what's worse about
I
it?
even wanted to say the word principled because I thought that might trigger you to think of your dad.
No. You know what's worse about it? Is that the thing I learned, because there's so many arguments I had with him, and I'm not like blaming him directly because it's like he has his own demons. It's just that there's so many arguments I had with him growing up where I was trying to change his mind. In some cases about like smoking or bad things, habits, things, bigger things too. And it felt hopeless, right? Like there's nothing I can say.
It felt rejecting.
Yeah. And yet the behavior I was seeing is like this intelligent, articulate man making what me as a kid were hard points to argue again. Like, oh, well, I don't know. I guess that makes sense. Like, and him, and I learned that, and I saw it. I didn't consciously. I interpreted it as a positive attribute. Like, you need to win arguments, right? And you need to stand your ground on principle, no matter what.
Do you think your dad was hurt?
Oh yeah.
Behind the scenes?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I think a lot of times what happens is I get into a mode where I don't care about anything else than making my point stick. Mm-hmm. And I am smart enough to build an internal logic that makes it true. Mm-hmm. And that if someone was willing to put up with hours of detailed context and exposition, if they were logically just following my lemmas, they would say like, oh, I guess that logically makes sense. Mm-hmm. But in the process, missing the point, which is that relationships are about different things. Relationships aren't about winning arguments. I'm shaking, man.
What do you mean? Why?
It's just a lot of emotion.
Like what?
It's when it's a big moment for us. It's a big realization internally.
Yeah. Our worst moments were these kinds of moments of fighting. And in those moments and after those moments, there have been various recovery attempts. As time went on, I learned to just go, who gives a fuck? And then I would apologize and, mean it, but know that you would bounce back too. I remember years ago, it was the political one. That one didn't really bother me that much because it just seemed so absurd, the conversation. And it was so brief. It was just like this burst of 7 minutes of horribleness.
Right.
And then you left and was kind of steaming, but then pretty quickly I was just like, the quicker we can get past this, the better. And I just texted you. I remember I just say, hey man, I'm sorry. I got upset and said some things that I shouldn't have said. And
I'm sorry about that. And then you quickly responded, it's like, yeah, I'm sorry too. I was being a dick or something.
Yeah.
And then, it was over. So when these things happen occasionally, and it's like, well, I don't know how I frame it. It's just like, well, Berto has this side of him where he just digs in on certain things, and I guess I do too. And I know foundationally he's a good person and he cares about me. I know that. So, you take the good with the bad. You get close enough to someone, you bump up against some edges. Maybe it's him, maybe it's me, maybe it's a combination. I don't know. Doesn't really matter because it's not very often. But at times I would try to get to where we got today.
Yeah.
And I don't think we had ever gotten to where we got today.
No, because I also hadn't told you the thing about me feeling psychoanalyzed, for example.
Yeah.
Because you know what it is part of it is, as you know about me, I roll with a lot of punches. Mm-hmm. And so the positive of that is that it will take a lot more for me to get to a point where I'm like, I'm done with this person. Mm-hmm. It'll take a lot because I'm like, whatever, right? You know some of the cases where I've gotten to that point.
And in some of the cases, I had to do it first before you did it. You would have never done it until you saw me go, that's some bullshit there. And you're like, wait, so we can do that? We can actually draw boundaries with people.
Right. So there is that. The flip side is that I actually had never seen myself from this angle about this topic, because I always ended up kind of like the end result of a lot of those things was, okay, yeah, I was being a jerk or whatever. However, I didn't notice that the pattern is avoidable. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to die on hills.
Well, and I would hope that you would see that you deserve to recognize when people are hurting your feelings. And
that's the other side. Yes.
And, well, that to me is the main side.
Yeah.
And that's in line with what you're saying is you deserve to be protected from people, and you're vulnerable, Bert, because the other thing you put out there is, and I think you believe this, that no one can hurt your feelings.
Oh my gosh, dude, this is so true. So that argument, going way back without specifics,
14 years,
it's the same shit. I felt hurt.
I bet.
For reasons I didn't explain to you at all. That weren't your fault at all or anything. It's just the reasons I felt hurt are why I dug in.
14 years ago.
And then that's probably
Can you vaguely tell me what you were?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically,
how do we work? I could take a guess.
Let me put it this way. You confronting me about this topic is you telling me at least 3 things about me. Number 1, I'm not a free person. Number 2, I'm not as good as you.
As good as me?
Yeah. I'm just telling you the feeling. And number 3, you now get to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Now, of course, from your perspective, like, yeah. But the problem is that all the layers built on this is like, it's me living in Colombia feeling like you have no control over anything, right? It's me living in a society, in a family where I have no say or ability to influence my thing, right? And feeling trapped, right? And it's also me in relationships and things where I'm feeling like, I'm feeling trapped too, right? And so then in that moment, all that bubbles up for me. I don't tell you any of this. I don't explain, oh, shoot. Like a total different conversation would have been, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're so right, blah, blah. Let me tell you some of the things that bubbled up for me, which are not your fault, just so you understand where
or even it partially is your fault with the tone that you had.
Sure, okay.
But that's important though, because you frame yourself as someone who can't be hurt and don't deserve to voice that.
Sure. So what I'm trying to get at is, I think it's not the only time. I think maybe all of the times that I've had knockdown fights about stuff, it might have started with me feeling hurt about something.
Yeah, I imagine.
Huh.
And your dad too.
Yeah.
Weirdly,
That's a head scratcher.
I mean, fits with my model of why we do these sorts of things. You're in the internal family systems model, your policeman or your guard comes forward, protector from the hurt little Berto on the inside and says, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, this is not happening. And I know what to do because my dad modeled to me a logic, and I'm smart. So watch this, pal. I'm going to overtake this conversation and I'm going to lay it.
Yeah, like I'm sure like in the politics thing, although I don't remember the specifics, there must have been something that threatened some ideal or something. And I felt like, and then I'm like, all right, well, this is one of those things. And of course, never conscious awareness of it.
If I was to take a guess, I would say that I stepped into an ongoing argument that you were having with other people.
Yeah.
Because I was providing nuance that, could be stepping in to the crossfires of like, unless you're on my side, then you're against me kind of a thing.
Right.
Because I was just presenting, I remember I was just trying to present like, well, I don't know, there's some nuance there that I believe. And you weren't having that.
That is very possible.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
But, to be clear, I'm to blame for being dickish, not only in these instances we're talking about, but just in general. I mean, the audience will say things sometimes, which is humiliating to me. They'll just be like, golly, Kirk is kind of a dick to Berto. I mean, they won't say those words, but in not so many words, they'll say that and they'll just be like, yeah, fuck. It's not the best quality of mine. And I suppose in those instances, I'm probably, what's the underlying thing? I must be hurt as well. Actually what it is probably on the podcast, because, I'm not like this, the sort of dickishness I present to you on this podcast, I don't do in real life.
No.
And it's fear of making a bad podcast. That's what it is.
That's quite possible.
It's fear of being seen as a bad podcaster. And I'll get into these moods sometimes because I'm on this, like, I'm trying to keep us on track, or I'm trying to make a good product, and I'm worried of being unsuccessful or being seen as some sort of incompetent person. And you will do something that I will think as being a barrier to me to succeed, and then I'll dismiss or be a dick to you. I think that's where it comes from, and I feel like that downplays my responsibility. I have a very particular. Lots of podcasters. Every podcaster thinks you think about this. I am a dick about it. You know what I mean? Like, I'll like go. I'll have a tone.
Well, okay, but so part of my role is that I usually never tell you that I felt this way or that way. Right? Like, how often do we do a thing and afterwards I'm like, during this one, I felt a little hurt because of blah.
Literally never, Berto, which you have every right to do.
This was the first time. I didn't have the language to do it. This was the first time where in my text message, I tried, but I didn't know how to communicate the thought. Because what I was trying to get at is everything that I just went through and discovered and explained, which was, oh, right, okay. I felt that my growth was being invalidated by your question, and that hurt me, right? Like that.
And the buildup of all the other times that I had hurt your feelings.
Right.
It's just like, it's happening again.
And so it's this kind of weird confluence of like, I generally just like roll with the punches, let water just roll over.
But I don't think that's a good idea, Berto.
It's not a good idea.
Right.
It builds up.
Yeah.
And then it comes out into an argument about philosophies and semantics.
You're just as vulnerable as all the other average people, Berto.
Yeah.
You're just as squishy and soft and
You learn something new every podcast.
I love you, man.
I love you, man.
Seriously. I mean, I don't know. I don't think on the podcast I've ever loved you as much as, I always love you, but something happened today.
I like to imagine a little tether connecting ourselves, our hearts.
Okay, so, wow, deep breaths. Deep breaths. Let's take a break. And when we get back, Berto and I continue to talk about this. Okay, we're back from the break. Let's get back to the episode.
So this is related, and this has been on my mind. And I don't know where this is going to go or if I'm going to cut this out. It's a brief tangent from this, but your wife is involved in this whole thing. And I had wondered after it got posted, the episode, what she thought about it. I might have asked you or something.
Yeah, the main thing that happened, because she hear the whole thing, but I explained to her, I played her the part of the clip, but then I talked about some of the comments. And
oh yeah, that's right.
Mostly what she said to me is like, well, that sucks. I'm like, oh, what? And she's like, I don't like that they're assuming I'm some sort of like spineless pushover that would let you like just walk all over me.
Right. And I know her, and I know that she wouldn't do that. She's a very strong person and vocal.
Right. and
but what you told me was that she was bothered in that way, which I get. But then what really worried me, and I could just be paranoid, is you and I at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, we're sitting down to play a video game together online, and this is like day of, I think, literally the day of the episode being posted or something, and she wanted you to
do
something else, like some family thing, right? And she came into the room, and I could hear her talking over the speakerphone, and she said something like, "Oh, you're gonna play? You're gonna play it with Kirk?" And you're like, "Yeah, just real quick, and then we'll get back to what we're doing." And she's like,
and I said, "And I don't care how you feel about it."
No. And she said, "Really? After everything that's happened," or something like that.
Oh, no. That had zero to do with any of this.
Oh, okay.
Zero. Like negative.
It was some sentence like that. And I would
No, it was so if I'm thinking right, because I have 2 kids.
Yeah.
And one of them is 7 and is getting sick all the time. So what I think was the case is that she had been quite sick. And no, I wasn't shirking my parental responsibilities.
No.
It's just that she felt like...
No, yeah. I know this, and again, I'm just going to state it, is that, dear listener, and, they know this from the way you talk about your kids, that you're an extremely equality-minded parent. You're extremely involved and like to do it, and you're heavily involved.
Because I need to see what they're putting on the clothes that they're wearing.
And so, and your kids are well adjusted and growing every day. I can't believe how fast your younger. You sent me a video of your younger one. Wait, can you tell me what the hell that video was referring to?
Because I had told her the story.
So context. Burrow sends me this video of his younger daughter doing a hilarious thing. Regardless, I didn't understand the context, and she just has this little like routine that she went into. It was 10 seconds, and
because she goes, "Daddy, I need to tell you something very serious." And I'm like, "Oh, what's that?" "Scrambled eggs, da 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 da, scrambled eggs."
Oh. Well, now I know.
7-year-old doing it.
Okay, well, now I know. I didn't know she was saying scrambled eggs.
Yeah.
So that's the.
It's because I told her the story how Paul came up with yesterday.
Yeah.
He woke up and he was at breakfast singing scrambled eggs.
Yeah. He had the melody without the words. Right. And okay. I didn't know she said scrambled eggs.
Right. She was, 7, right? So it's kind of.
But the first thing I noticed, it was weird because. How old she is now and her voice and the way she moves.
Right.
I thought it was your older daughter for half a second.
Oh my God. Right.
Because I feel like she's starting to look more like her older sister.
There's some similarities for sure.
And I was like, oh my God, that's the young one. And I thought, how did she grow so old?
You just saw her a few months ago.
Yeah. Like she's so much old. Like there's some kind of pituitary gland that kicked in or something. Anyway.
But anyway, so that day, there was likely, in fact, I'm pretty sure I know which one it was. And it was like, oh, we got this thing to deal with. And I'm like, I know, let me just play this one game.
But very, and we can leave this out. I've been worried this whole time and figured at some point I'm going to run into her and I'll just talk with her about it. But is she upset?
No.
At me?
100 billion% no.
Okay.
This is part of the thing that I was so freaking annoyed at myself because a lot of listeners left with a bad impression. But even the ones that left with a okay impression, they were still like, you still shouldn't talk to your wife that way or whatever, right? By the way, some of them were, because when I was trying to explain myself, some of them like, we never said your wife's a pushover. Well, some of them did. Those are the comments that were that you. And anyways, but the long story here was that, yes, this would have been like probably a 5-minute conversation we had. about this, in which she was mostly annoyed that some, not all, some listeners that wrote comments would have assumed.
She's also protective of you.
That and she is protective of me.
And so she sees people
right.
being
That's
upset.
fair. So she was like, "Oh, that's annoying." But also, I can't believe they would assume this, right?
Yeah. But is she upset at me because it would?
No.
Because it could be perceived as though I hung you out to dry.
Right, but no, because first of all, we didn't sit down and watch and critique or anything. It was literally just I told her the context, and then I told her how annoyed I was that I was trying to respond to these comments, right? And of course, I gave her my side of the story, so she was already empathetic for that, right?
Yeah.
Plus, like you said, she defends me and stuff. But no, 100%, 1,000,000,000%. I would.
Can you tell her everything that happened today so that
I will
if there
tell her
is some
everything that happened
lingering...
today. I will tell her,
and
you confronted me, point your finger in my face, I will tell her everything.
And the next time I see her, if I get a chance, I will talk with her about it. And because...
You shouldn't care how she feels.
Because... I don't know. I just feel like in the past I would have run into her more frequently and we would have just had a chat about it. But
Yeah, that's
I feel like I don't see her in person.
These big...
I don't see her in person as often. And by the way, I was actually wanting to have the two of you over and maybe your brother for dinner sometime.
We need to do that. And I told you I have a friend from Colombia going to be in town.
Okay.
We're going to do a get together at my place.
Okay.
So it's a good time for all of us to hug.
Well, and then Carlos
and Carlos is coming
up from Mexico.
Yeah.
So anyway.
But no, 100% no.
Okay.
That wasn't that night. She's fine. There's nothing.
I mean, I didn't assume entirely, but I was just like, the next time I see her, I'm going to have a talk and I'm sure things will work out, but it just hasn't happened. So I was kind of, anyway, okay, well, that's good to know. And that makes me feel better because I don't know how she reacts to these kinds of hubbubs.
No, that's right. And now the one thing I said, the one thing I thought to myself after that episode is, I probably don't, I used to never talk about my current life, that I was married, any of that. And a lot of it is because I didn't want to, get into issues like this or anything. But the way I was thinking about it is, I think to be fair to her, I will probably still mostly talk about my past and not talk much about our daily lives.
Well, I remember, so, and we can get all this out, but I have talked with her about that concern of her privacy.
Yeah.
And obviously you've talked with her much more explicitly than I have, but the impression that I've gotten on the few times I've talked with her about it is you seem to be more concerned about it than she is. There's a boundary that she doesn't want you to cross.
And I don't want to misrepresent her, and I don't want to
But it felt like what she was saying was she didn't mind if you were more disclosing as long as certain things weren't disclosed. You know what I mean?
She definitely was, I think, happy that I said I was married.
Yeah.
But definitely, she was also a little freaked out.
Right.
But yeah,
there's a boundary about what she doesn't want you discussing, but
it's just, I think it's just for myself, for my own comfort zone is basically.
Totally. Okay. That.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, talk more about, and honestly, part of it is that if there are things that currently I'm still struggling with, I'm probably not ready to open my full kimono.
Totally.
And yet, is that a bad thing to say?
No, that's good.
Okay. And yet, there are things that I have processed enough to where I actually can talk about them without maybe breaking down, right?
Totally. Well,
today I broke down. We broke down.
Well, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
You can do either. And Bob does a similar thing. Bob's very self-disclosing, but there's certain things that have a certain current relevancy and complication that he won't go into. My boundaries are even further back, really, because that's just how it is. I could give the justification.
So each person has to be comfortable with it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And my boundary has changed over the years for sure. So, and that's totally fine and recommended. But yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And that makes more sense that it's really your comfortability, not that you're purely basing it on
It's similar
hers.
to I don't go into a lot of current drama with friends or something, or if I mention something it's really vague, right? Because it's just
yeah,
I don't feel comfortable with it. I haven't checked with anyone about it, so I don't, but my past,
Yeah.
my stumbles on the road.
Well, and those things that happened in the past, like the stalking when you were 20 or whatever. I mean, I don't know if we call it stalking, but it's kind of in that direction.
Yeah, the not so healthy actions in that direction.
Yeah, calling the guy that was a platonic friend of your current wife, then girlfriend of yours, and asking him very explicit sexual questions, posing yourself as an anonymous survey giver.
It's on the psychopathy spectrum.
It's on some sort of lack of empathy spectrum. And, your progression over 30 years to where you are now, I've seen bits and pieces of it. There were moments where you would talk about that briefly with me off the podcast, and it seemed like over the decades you and then when you talked about it on the podcast and you volunteered it, you were just like, that reminds me of a thing that I did.
Yeah.
And it has this certain progression look to it where there was emerging acceptance and also distance from it and a way of framing it and feeling very divorced from that early Berto, feeling like I'm really not him anymore. There is a whole set of things I was doing. But if we were round the clock back to when I first met you and you're in your early 30s, you might have had a harder time
about a lot of things.
Talking about it.
Yeah, as an example, when we first started podcasting, I'm sure I talked about how I used to have a spending addiction, but at the time I still had aspects of that with other things, right?
Right.
And I'm just using that as one example of like, a lot of these things are long roads, long journeys. In fact, I don't think they ever go to zero. Like it's a long curve. And when you're in the middle of like a steep slope of it, you're not really even aware of where you are. Right. And so, it makes sense. I think the more time you've had to process, talk, go to therapy, do a lot of things, the more you can say, well, there's also value. And there's a lot of podcasters that do this or YouTubers that do this that I appreciate. There is also value sometimes in disclosing problems you're dealing with and maybe talking about how you're approaching them. I know people we really respect. One of them has been diagnosed with cancer and he's doing this big process in his life, and he's talked about it on his videos that he's done.
Who? Wait.
Hank and
right.
John. Hank, right?
Yeah, Hank. Yeah. His YouTube channel now has videos about him going through chemo.
Yeah. And he's not, obviously he hasn't processed that because he's in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But he's talking about it.
But he might have processed it to a certain point.
And I've talked about the health issues I've had, and I haven't processed those. I'm still going through it, right? So it's a mix, right?
But it took us a while,
Yeah.
Both of us, to talk about some of those things.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about it maybe for months and months until it felt like we had it under control to the point where we could disclose it on the podcast. Anyway, but yeah. So,
okay. But the long story short there is that I think you're right. It comes down to personal comfort zone, and in general, no, there was 0% anguish about any of that. If anything, if my wife is gonna bonk you upside the head with some coffee bag or something, it's because we play video games so much.
And I'll take it.
Okay, so what do you think? Let me know what you think in the comments on Patreon, on YouTube. You can email us, and know that I'm feeling pretty vulnerable. And although Humberto comes off like he's not vulnerable, he's arguably more vulnerable than I am in a lot of ways, because often people who portray a persona of someone that isn't really affected by things, these people are often deeply, deeply affected. And I think Humberto is one of those people. He's very good at tricking me into believing that he is unaffected by things. But the more and more I get to know him, the more and more I'm just like, no, do not believe that. That's a defense that he built up for himself. We're still recovering from this. It's not over, right? I don't want him in particular, but I guess me as well, to shut down again if the comments are mean to us. It's just a matter of tone. You can certainly be critical, but it's just a matter of tone, right? That's the whole idea of this whole fight that we had, right? It's just the vibe you give across. And it's hard to do that in comments, but maybe a little emoji or something. I don't know. I feel like a lot of y'all are really good at that, so I don't need to tell you that. It's weird after 15 years that we can make a podcast and have it feel like we've never done something like that before. It's also weird that after 20 years of being best friends and very close to Humberto, that we still have a lot of growing to do. And after 52 years of being on this planet for myself, that I still have a lot of growing to do, which of course is obvious, but just life never ceases to amaze me. And I hope that for yourself, maybe this can translate in some helpful way. And maybe that would be the thing I'd love to hear about, is that if this helps at all, to motivate you to maybe see a past fight that you had with a friend or a partner or a family member in a different light, a more compassionate light, that you can see yourself as being okay with your flaws. We all have massive flaws, although it's not great and we don't celebrate those things, but we can just be okay with ourselves and be accepting of ourselves and be accepted by others. Also, that softness and humility and apologies can really change a conversation from a fight into crying together and transformation, a breakthrough. After we recorded this episode, Humberto, so it was after midnight. It was like 12:30 at night, and we tend to talk a lot after the podcast, believe it or not. Like, we'll stop recording and we keep yammering, and he was really blown away at the breakthrough that he had made. And he's made a number of breakthroughs on the podcast. He said this was quite possibly the biggest breakthrough he's ever had on the podcast, and he didn't use that word lightly. I mean, he's just, this whole new world had opened up to him. Because this has been a life, as he gets into in the episode that we just heard, this has been a lifelong thorn in his side, major thorn in his side in his relationships. His dad, his family members, his friends, himself, his marriage. This has been an ongoing problem or concern of his for his entire life, and to seemingly finally have a handle on it, a way forward, was a huge deal. So anyway, that's that episode. I hope that my career isn't over as a podcaster, and everyone, please take care of yourself. And I'm going to take care of myself, and Humberto's going to take care of himself, because we all deserve it. We really, really do.